I'm joined by Innovision IP founder, Peter Schwabach, and Head of Business Development, Abby Sachs. Peter and Abby, tell us a bit more about the work you and your colleagues do at Innovision IP.
The status quo at the moment, if you go to hospital, is that you have a scan and the results will be interpreted or looked at by a clinician, so using the human eye. One of the challenges when you have potentially a brain injury is that the damage is really at the microscopic level. So the end result is that the vast majority of people who've had a scan, let's say an MRI scan, will be told by the clinicians that they don't have an injury. And that leads to a huge number of people who are misdiagnosed. What Innovision does, essentially, it uses high-performance computers and algorithms for the computers to analyze the data, and therefore using that tool to create maps of the area of the brain which are abnormal. And additionally, we compare those results with thousands of normal people. So when you have a scan, your results are compared maybe with 1,000 people of your age and gender, and you get a very, very accurate picture of the abnormalities that are present. And that's very useful both for clinicians, but also for lawyers who are trying to determine whether an individual they are representing has a brain injury or not.
So Abby, Peter mentioned the way it's sort of by the human eye at the moment. How are the results delivered to clinicians or the person looking at the results? Is it similar, to use a bad analogy, like VAR in football, where it's sent over to someone in a room who may or may not get it right? How are they going to get the right readings from these results that you don't from an MRI?
Great question. So all of our work is done in the cloud, remotely, using these high-performance computers that Peter mentioned. They are completely objective. We are not given any information about patients that we're scanning. In doing so, we're able to provide a really in-depth, clear analysis that's at the microstructural level. And in doing so, finally, we can kind of bring clarity to those abnormalities in the brain. And there's no sense, oh, that's a bad call from the ref. These are the results. And for that reason, what we found is that we've never had a report successfully challenged or overturned in any context because the results speak for themselves.
And is there a timeline of when this imaging is, it can be used, or after say 6 months it can't be used? What's the sort of, is it as effective from day one as it is on day 100?
Absolutely. So what happens is, it is unfortunately the case that the vast majority of people who have a brain injury, it's permanent. So you're getting essentially evidence of an injury or an abnormality. What we can't say is, oh, was it caused on that date or that date? What you're getting is very clear evidence that there is an abnormality, where that abnormality is, and the severity of that abnormality.
So Peter, you're the founder of the company, so how did Innovision come about and why?
My background is I'm a technology investor, and I met a team of very, very brilliant scientists from Oxford who had been developing this technology. And essentially, I identified that there would be interest in the market for a service where you are essentially utilizing the power of, the cloud and algorithms to basically look at an area which has been the subject of a great deal of misdiagnosis. And essentially what we've done is create the team, the entity with which to carry out this service. So at the moment, we're able to analyze, 1,000 scans a week. We're now operating in America, in South Africa, in New Zealand, Australia, where we're able to process a lot of images and create these results. And I'm very gratified that what we do changes people's lives, because in most cases, people have been told all their life there's nothing wrong with it. And actually having evidence to explain their symptoms is very liberating.
So Peter, what do you think it can achieve or hope it can achieve?
I was very aware that brain injury is an area where the science has really lagged behind other imaging tools. So There's very sophisticated imaging now for cancer or for heart disease. And because of the unique challenges of the brain, it is the one part of the anatomy where the human eye cannot detect abnormalities. So it's very easy, to spot a lesion or a tumor with the naked eye. When you're looking at the brain, there are, in an MRI image, there are maybe 100 million pixels. And to have a doctor look at that and say, is there something abnormal, is not feasible. And what I identified was that there is the ability through technology and through high-performance computers and the cloud to process a huge amount of information and to identify abnormalities, and then be able to measure how those abnormalities compare with, thousands of normal people. And that's a process that can be done in minutes. Whereas, previously, if you're having a doctor look at a scan, you're not going to get that result. And in fact, 90% of people who have a look at MRI images are simply told that their brains are normal, even if they have a brain injury.
Could be the difference in the outcome for the person who suffered from the TBI. That's what we want this individual to do is say, right, this is going to make a change because.
So what we've found is that the majority of people we've scanned have questioned their own sanity. They've been told, no, you don't have a brain injury. Pull yourself together. There's nothing wrong with you. And they're told that enough times to start questioning their own sanity. And actually being told, you have a brain injury, it's in this part of the brain, it's responsible for language or memory, is a huge relief, because suddenly inexplicable symptoms become elements they can understand, and they can move on with their lives. They can also get potentially treatment, and also potentially they are eligible for compensation, because a lot of companies will say, well, there's nothing wrong with you, pull yourself together. Whereas if you can say, look, I do have an injury, it was caused here, that automatically opens the doors potentially to compensation, and essentially it provides an improvement to that person's life.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Abby.
There were three types of scan that we analysed and looked at and we created reports on. The first type of scan is a standard structural scan, the kind of scan that you might have in a hospital. And in that, you can see the rim of the brain, which is the cortex where you do processing. And you can also see what is called the white matter, which are the connections of the brain. The second type of scan we looked at is called a diffusion weighted image, where you look at how water in the brain diffuses. And that's made possible again by an MRI scanner. And the third type of scan we looked at is where we look at brain activity using a device which measures the magnetic fields around the head, which are due to the underlying electrical activity within the brain. What we saw today was how those scans, all three types of scans, were different in James Cracknell compared to a large set of control individuals. What was clear in the structural scan, the first type of scan, was that James Cracknell had damage to the frontal lobes of his brain, both the right and the left. And that was a direct result of the injury that he had, the mechanical injury, traumatic brain injury he had because of the accident. But in fact, the rest of the brain looked to the eye and would be reported on by neuroradiologists as being normal. And it's only when you look at the second type of scan, the diffusion weighted image, that you start to see differences between James's brain and those of the controls. What we saw in James Cracknell's brain was the result of those shearing forces throughout the brain in a number of white matter tracts. A large number of these were affected towards the front of the brain, connecting the frontal areas to the deep structures within the brain and to other cortical areas. When we look at the brain activity scans, the third type of scan, what has been known since the Second World War is immediately after a traumatic brain injury, you see a change in brain activity. And you see what are called slow waves. These are oscillations in the brain activity between 1 and 4 times a second. Now, slow waves are normal in individuals when they're in deep sleep, when the brain is consolidating what's happened from the rest of the day and doing a maintenance in terms of what goes on. But you do not normally see slow waves in the awake, alert brain. But in James's case, we did see it in a number of areas. One of the areas that had significant changes were the areas next to where the structural damage were in the front of the brain. We also looked at changes in what are called gamma waves. These are higher frequency oscillations, and they're associated with normal processing in the brain, and they're associated with the transmission of information from one area to another. What has been known for a long time is after a head injury, you can see increases in these oscillations. And these are basically an increase in the background noise in those brain areas. And one of the areas in his brain that showed this increase in activity, effectively an increase in noise, was the face processing area.
Today was very different. It was showing where there was a change to the normal structure of the brain, and then going through and showing, right, this is, there's 77 pathways, and then, but the flow through is blocked on 54 of them. So it's just like effectively going through sand rather than throwing up a nice corridor, and then understanding how that impacts behavior and understanding and why you get tired. And actually, as that process went on and going through what impact that could have on behavior, what I struggle with, was really enlightening, and almost like witch doctory, that from seeing my scan, that the interpretation would be, okay, you might struggle with this and this in your life. And those are the things that I've struggled with and I've built up coping mechanisms over the last 14 years, whereas I wish I'd been able to see that in year 1 and then adapt to behavior straight away, rather than the impact that has caused in life until I developed my own coping mechanisms. So what bothers you and what you can control. So a noisy environment, and then the fatigue that takes to filter the noise out, to concentrate on what you're doing, and then just in the family, that I would really struggle with family meals, in that they are noisy, the kids are never never quiet, never eat, and that had never been a problem, but then it was a problem, and then I couldn't really cope with that. So then meal times became really stressful, because they could understand why Dad was getting really angry about things that they'd done, they'd always behaved that way. And then I wouldn't really understand how the noise of that I couldn't cope with. And so the upshot of that is that it made it really hard to have meals together. And as a family, that's a really important thing. And so if that had been explained, we could have built in coping mechanisms for that, to then ease those social times together became socially fun times, rather than stressful times where the kids didn't look forward to it and I didn't look forward to it. If I'd had those scans and the interpretation of them 15 years ago, it would have been, I could have developed straight away the coping strategies that through trial and error I had to, and I've done, but it's taken a decade and plus, and significant change in my life may or may not have happened if that hadn't been the case. The MEG scan and the difficulty with facial recognition, it's something that I developed a coping strategy for. And it was actually in the first year after the accident, I would meet people and then see them a week later and they'd say hello and I had no recognition. They said, we met a week ago. So then if I was going somewhere and I was going to dinner or something, I would try and get the names of people and have photos of them to work out if I'd met them before. So I developed my own coping strategy. But I had to do that myself through trial and error rather than being earlier on realised that was going to be a big problem. And then the other part of it, which is not just the facial recognition, is actually having the confidence, which is nothing that it does go with the brain, having the confidence to own that you have a difficulty. So I didn't, and I probably still don't have the confidence to go up and say, I'm not sure if we've met before. I'm really bad with faces, so please forgive me. And then puts everyone at ease rather than not being confident enough to, not want to admit I had a failing or a weakness. And then both people are in a really uncomfortable situation doing a dance around, you can't remember me. And I'm going, have I met him before or not? And so that the knock-on effect is I'd avoid going to social situations because I didn't want to get into that situation. It didn't want to get into that scenario. So knowing it and building a strategy earlier would be so much helpful. And I think that is really important in so much of what I've learned today. The scan would massively help because knowledge is power. And I think that was very helpful with that. And I think it's exactly the same with knowing what's going on in your brain because it controls absolutely everything. And the more I'd known 15 years ago, the better. I think it would have been really useful for my ex to have seen them and for us to see them together. The only marriage advice we had was when I was discharged, was told 85% of people will get divorced. And that was it. And then you can see why, because we didn't know we're firefighting on our own with no skill of being a firefighter, whereas these scans give you the skill base.